This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Score Sheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Hello and welcome to another Score Sheet podcast. This is mid-September, September 15th today, so the first weekend of football games are in the books. The baseball season's got about 2 weeks left of the regular season. Speaking of baseball, this is the time of year when the off-season is getting close and people start thinking about what they're going to do with their team in the off-season as far as roster movement. If you're in a single-season league, obviously there's no trading in the off-season since the league is just a one-year league. But even for those folks, there are things that I think can really help you prepare for next year. You know, right now when the season is fresh in your mind is a really good time to maybe jot down some notes about players that might have been hurt and so underperformed and are primed for a bounce back next year. A guy with a nagging injury all year long and so maybe hit 250 when everyone was expecting him to hit 290. It's the kind of guy you might want to draft a little higher than other people do next year in hopes that when he's healthy he'll hit that 290 everybody expected. Another thing you might look at is playing time, guys that kind of came out of nowhere but only for the last few weeks of the season, so their stats aren't going to be too gaudy. But next year, if they get to play a full season and they perform like they did the last few weeks of this year, they might really be valuable players. Then, of course, most score sheet players actually play in leagues that keep players from year to year. And in those leagues, trading goes on quite a bit in a lot of those leagues, October, November, December. In fact, we have a lot of leagues where there's more trading done in the fall than there is during the regular season. So rather than just kind of saying, I don't think I'll do anything for my team for 3 months while your competitors kind of build up their rosters, you might keep an eye on your league's webpage, see what kind of trade notes, trade offers people are putting out there, and maybe it's a chance for you to get rid of that second third baseman you have who's actually a pretty good player but that you're not going to keep since you already have another third baseman. But you might be able to trade him to someone before they fill that third base hole on their team with another team's cast-offs. So don't, especially if you're in a continuing league, don't just figure the off-season is a time to do nothing. It's actually a pretty good time to really tinker with your roster. Well, as far as football, obviously, people are starting to think about what to do with their depth charts for the second week of the season. Obviously, what happened in week one is going to have some influence on who you play. But even though I think I said in our last podcast that football is kind of a short season and you can't just keep playing the same guy week after week because after only 3 or 4 weeks you're suddenly a quarter of the way or more through the season, it's also true you don't want to overreact too much to week one. I don't think you want to trade your whole team for Cam Newton just because he threw for 400 yards and set the opening day rookie passing record. Though, certainly if you have Cam Newton, and especially if you were one of the few people that actually played him in week one, you were pretty dang happy. But on the flip side, the guys that had a really bad week, you have to kind of, I think, decide, well, gee, was that just a bad week? And if it had happened in week 6, you wouldn't have even noticed? Or is it really a sign that maybe this guy just isn't going to do what you thought? I think Chad Ochocinco comes to mind. Brady threw for over 500 yards. Clearly, at least in week one, he wasn't targeting Ochocinco very high on his list of receivers. I think I read he had 9 different receivers catch passes. So if a guy isn't even being targeted by his quarterback and he's a receiver, that's pretty much a reason you might want to downgrade him. Same with a running back. If you got a running back that just didn't get many yards because he didn't play much, somebody else got all the touches, then that's liable to continue. But on the other hand, you have a guy like Frank Gore who got his normal number of touches and just the Niners' running game was not clicking. It's possible that'll go on all year, but more likely based on Gore's past history and all, as long as he continues to get touches, and probably since you spent a fairly high draft pick on him, around 1 or 2, I think you'd want to play a guy like that. So I think football, more than any other sport, is kind of a balancing act of not waiting too long to make a move because the season is short, but you don't want to overreact just based on 1 week's statistics too much. So like I said, I tend to look after just 1 week more at how a guy was used rather than what he did. Though the exception to that might be Donovan McNabb. His performance was just plain brutal. I think that, I don't know how many of you were actually starting him as your number one quarterback anyhow, but when you throw for less than 100 yards in the NFL, it's not a very good sign. Alex Smith, being a Niner fan, didn't exactly impress much either. This talk of Harbaugh being an offensive guru. I think Alex got something like 109 yards. So performances like that, of course, in those two cases, like I said, I don't know. You're probably not starting McNabb or Alex Smith on your fantasy team unless you've already had some unforeseen injury, or you were just drafting at other positions and kind of ignored the quarterback position. And then one other thing you might look at maybe is some of the defenses in the NFL that performed very badly, or special teams. The Niners ran a punt and a kickoff back against Seattle. Maybe if you have more than one specials team, you try and decide who to start. If one of them is playing against Seattle, you might want to start them. And probably more important or more likely to figure into your plans are the defenses you're going to be facing. There were some pretty high-scoring games. I think if Cam Newton can throw for 400 and almost 450 yards in his very first NFL game, then maybe targeting the Arizona defense, if you've got some receivers or quarterbacks that are facing Arizona, you might want to start them. I think football is a game where matchups are more important than any other sport. In fact, I did the idiotic thing this week week one, of starting Ben Roethlisberger without fully considering that he was facing Baltimore. While I didn't expect him to do that badly no matter who he was facing, this 2 interceptions, 3 fumbles, made for a pretty dismal week. Certainly would have rather started Matt Stafford, especially since who knows how long he's going to be healthy. But he sure looked good among players that had performances that were better or worse than people expected. There was nothing disappointing about his performance, except that once again he kind of seemed to get a little nagging injury, and you just wonder how healthy he's going to be once again. Anyhow, I hope that baseball season, hopefully you're not worried about the offseason yet because you're still in the middle of a pennant race or a chase for a wild card spot. In that case, worrying about what you're going to do in the offseason is hopefully weeks away for you. But either way, I think baseball, like I said, football is a short season. It's one you got to really stay on top of. I think an appeal of fantasy baseball for many folks is that it's a year-round season, certainly for the continuing leagues that most people play in. So either way, it is a great time in the sports season. Hockey's about to start, baseball's right there, football's getting going. Hope you're enjoying your fantasy time and have a great week.